Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. Great to see you all in the room and great to have you with us today for another DEMAC webinar. This time where we would like to present you some good practices from the diaspora community on emergency responses. We're really excited to have some of the diaspora representatives also today with us in the room, and we're going to introduce them in a moment. I'm Alexandra Finkpil, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Diaspora Emergency and Action and Coordination Initiative. I have a whole team here in Copenhagen and behind the scenes today with me, so thanks to them as well for helping with tech support and everything. DEMAC is a global initiative that aims to enhance coordination among diaspora organizations involved in humanitarian assistance in emergencies and coordination across diaspora organizations and institutional humanitarian actors. So we really aim to increase engagement and visibility for diaspora organizations in the humanitarian system and to contribute to a deeper understanding of what is it that diaspora organizations as humanitarian actors do. And by all of this, we aim to transform the humanitarian system to become more inclusive of non-traditional actors and to really be aware of who else is out there. And research, not only our research, also a lot of other research has shown that diasporas do engage in humanitarian emergencies. They are multi-sectoral, they are fast responding actors, transnationally active, supporting their countries of origin whenever there is an emergency. And they do have a deep connection, deep understanding of the local context, and are often also among the first responders in emergencies. So to create a better response and to ultimately really save lives and do that in a coordinated manner, we work a lot with diaspora responders. And during this webinar, we want to present you some of the success stories and hear from different diaspora organization representatives what brought them where they are. And as with every success, what were the challenges along the way? What were the tricky parts? What were the celebrations they had along the way to get where they are today? We published the Good Practice Guide, and this research comes also based on the request of diaspora themselves, with the identification of the need to more explicitly raise the awareness on the strengths and the advantages of diaspora responders, and to identify the complementarities with the institutional humanitarian system. So in the report, and I hope you've seen it, we have a variety of topics. It deals with effective coordination and partnerships with institutional humanitarian actors. It is about knowledge transfer, technical skills. It's about partnership with local civil society. It's about gender-specific assistance, the humanitarian development nexus, many more. I hope that was enough teasers. If you haven't read it yet, go and read it and have a look. Before we start, 2 housekeeping remarks. We'll be recording this webinar today, so we'll also put it online on our YouTube channel afterwards. And as you can see, you're all muted, but we have a question and answer and a chat function. So we would really like to hear your thoughts, your comments, but also your questions throughout the discussion. So please do feel free to put it all in the chat, and we'll have a question and answer session at the very end, where we will also pick those up and provide you some answers to the questions. Here, having said all of that, I would like to introduce Gudrun van Pottelberg, who has been the researcher behind the Good Practice Narrative Report. She's a senior humanitarian analyst and practitioner and very experienced researcher on humanitarian affairs and crisis management, and brings comprehensive knowledge on migration and including some work on diasporas across different contexts and countries. And she has been doing the 28 interviews for the Good Practice Guide. So really also a lot of conversations and a lot of knowledge that has gone into it. Thank you very much for that, Gudrun. And having said that, over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, DEMAC, for inviting me to facilitate this webinar. It has been a really pleasure to do this research on good practices of diaspora humanitarian engagement. It is so rich, as you will see from the discussions that we're going to have. But indeed, today it's not about me talking, because I think we have 3 fantastic panelists here with us, and it is really we're here to listen from their experiences, from their lessons learned and challenges that they have experienced as well in the next 30 minutes, 40 minutes or so. And then afterwards, of course, you will have the possibility also to ask anything you ever wanted to know, right? So questions and answers, as Alexandra has said. But let me introduce to you our panelists. So we have three from a very, very different operational experiences and three different nationalities as well, to show that indeed the diaspora are, if I may say, all over, and work in all different contexts and have a great importance as such. First of all, we have Summer Nasser. Is here with us, and Summer is the Chief Executive Officer of Yemen Aid. And Summer is based in the US, so it's rather early for her. So thank you very much for joining. And Yemen Aid actually is included in the guide as an example of a good practice of how to work with institutional humanitarian actors. The rather classical, traditional system as we tend to know it. And Yemen Aid in particular is a very good example, to show that diaspora organizations can become this trustworthy, this respected humanitarian partner, whereby coordination works well. And I'm sure Summer is going to share a number of lessons, about that experience, probably also challenges as well, and how Yemen Aid actually did it, because I think you went really, Summer, through a fantastic process, very gradual, with a lot of learning and sometimes mistakes as well, right? But where you are now, I think it's an extremely good example of how it can work. Right? So we'll hear Summer very soon, but before that, let me also introduce you Cynthia Santos. And Cynthia Santos is chair and founder of Healing Venezuela, so very different context here. And Healing Venezuela is included in the guide as a good practice of how to work with local organizations. We all know the importance of working with local organizations, localization agenda. We've heard it a lot before, but also diaspora organizations have that experience, have this advantage of how to work with local organizations. And Healing Venezuela in particular, also here an extremely interesting process where, Cynthia, you will explain us all about it, of how they've learned to work in an effective and efficient manner with local organizations, right? Whereby they also had to learn along the way, where they came to realize that there are a number of standards, a number of requirements for local actors, and that indeed that quality matters rather than quantity. So Cynthia, welcome with us as well, and we'll turn to you also very soon. But before that, don't forget Dr. Yasir Youssef, who is the current president of the Sudanese and American Physicians Association. It's a very different topic again, but this organization here as well is a very interesting example. And in this case, now it's a good practice of how to transfer knowledge and experience from country where the diaspora lives, to the country from where they come from. And SAPA, so the Sudanese American Physicians Associations, they have been extremely active during COVID, but also in non-COVID times. And here, it's very interesting to see how the association, and they will tell us all about it, how they have experienced to translate knowledge, and the experience that they have gained in the US, but then to adapt it also to the Sudanese context, which is of course very much needed. So very quick introduction to the three panelists, and then I'll stop the talking because we want to listen to them. How it's going to work is that I've prepared a number of questions that I'm going to, put to our three panelists, and it's up to them to respond it. But let's see how it goes. I think it's good to have a good discussion. And then, of course, don't hesitate to already include your questions into the chat or the Q&A box so we can pick it up afterwards. But to our three panelists, we talk about good practices. And Alexandra said it indeed, this guide contains 28 good practices. 2 times 14, 14 good practices, 2 examples per good practice. I hope all of you, of course, read the good practice, went through it. But let me put this question to you. If you look at the guide, to your opinion, what is for you the most relevant the most important good practice in this kind? And I'm asking that because indeed we're looking for these success stories, these advantages that diaspora organizations have. So to your opinion, what do you think is like a key feature, a key advantage that diaspora organizations have? This may be the good practice where yourself are featured, of course, but it also may be different. Cynthia, should we start with you?
Sure. Good one. And thank you so much for inviting me to this seminar. I'm very honored to be here today. I was reviewing the good practices, and actually it's very difficult to choose which is the best one because or the most significant one, because there are very good examples actually of good diaspora practice. Probably the one that is most relevant to us, or the one that where we can learn a lot as Healing Venezuela, was the good practice number one. And in Yemenite summer, I didn't know that you were going to be on the call from Yemenite, but actually Yemenite has a very, very good experience in bridging the Western organizations with what is happening in the country, which is is very hard for a Western to understand probably what's really happening in the country in Yemen. The same for Venezuela. It's very hard for people to understand what's really going on in Venezuela. So the fact that you were so good at coordinating with institutional humanitarian actor, I think it's extremely important for all of us in the diaspora space. And that actually links very much with the second practice that I think is extremely important, which is to create these umbrella organizations. I think one of the greatest success of most of the good practices that I've read of, and actually, we haven't done it at Healing Venezuela or as Venezuelan diaspora, we haven't achieved that. And this is why I think it's so important to read that actually the fact that you had some umbrella organizations that you could speak with, let's say one voice, and you have one channel of communication, it made you even more credible as an actor. And that I think is extremely important for all of us to learn and to try to strive for that, to create these umbrella organizations that can be perceived as valid interlocutors with the institutional actors. And I would say probably the last practice, because it's absolutely vital for all of us, is fundraising. And we had some very good examples from them. Some institutionals new ways. For example, in Somalian, they described very well the way that they went, how the journey to become a small NGO, diaspora NGO, to a partner for institutional actors. So throughout all the process of institutionalize the organization, the HR, the efforts on HR, the efforts on strategy and planning, on policies in place. So those things are, I think they are extremely important, again, when you want to raise the profile of your child and demonstrate that you're actually a very valid interlocutor, and you have the capacity to do things on the ground. Now that links to what is, where we were chosen at Healing Venezuela, and very summarized why diaspora organizations are important and are more effective in a way. First of all, because we're small, we're lean, we can react very quickly, we can take very quick decisions. We know the ground. I mean, we know who is who on the ground, and we know how to deal with the ground. Something that, in my experience, that large international organizations haven't learned yet. I mean, we have, really, it's very interesting to see how they step into stones that we would never even, try to approach. So I think in that sense, the learning, the experience, and the commitment also that diaspora organizations have towards their country of origin, it's something that it's basically absolute vital for successful response. So that would be kind of in a nutshell. But there is a lot. I mean, there is a lot to learn from the good practice guide.
That's great. Thank you, Cynthia. Indeed, you ended with the word commitment. I mean, it's something I've seen across all interviews, and that remains very impressive. The commitment that all the members of the diaspora organizations have. A lot is based on volunteering work. There are not many that are, paid employees as such. So definitely it is something that remains very impressive. Absolutely. Let me move to Yassir. Yassir, same question to you. If you look through the guide, what is for you the most significant practice? The one that you say like, okay, this is what we are about.
Thanks very much, Gordon, and thanks to DMAC for allowing us to participate. And it's a great platform to learn and to collaborate, actually, and that's extremely important for an organization like ours. I think that I would have to agree with Cynthia a lot. I think the biggest advantage that we have as a diaspora organization is this good understanding of both worlds. I myself grew up in Sudan and practiced in Sudan, then moved to the United States. So I do understand the local challenges, and I've come to learn the languages of donors here in the United States and agencies that we get funding from. And I think taking advantage of this unique position would allow you to do great things. And, just to give you two specific quick examples from our work, like during the COVID-19 situation, we were the hospitals where patients being treated, these hospitals where we practiced, we do understand the limitation there. We do know the physicians, many of them are our classmates. So it was very easy and quick for us to be able to set daily rounds where we help them review patients and so forth. Another example in the recent floodings that's overwhelming Sudan and many other parts of the world, there was this retired diplomat who's residing in the US, who comes from one of the areas that were heavily impacted by the flooding. He was able to connect us with people in the ground. We were able to have firsthand information, and we were able to intervene very quickly, supporting some basic needs until the bigger players like the UN agency came in. So I do think this good understanding of both worlds and understanding the needs is the key advantage. And I think I would have to agree with Cynthia as well, that when you look at the guide, you'll have to choose all of the above. All these practices are extremely important. And I can't imagine us being successful without trying to stick into most, not all of them. But I would say, know your partners on the ground, work with them, respect them, and try to learn from them.
Absolutely. Where Cynthia emphasized commitment, I think, yes, you emphasize indeed this understanding, and that is a clear advantage that yes, organizations have. You said it yourself, you grew up in the country, so you understand better the needs, you speak the languages, you can, offer that immediate assistance. Absolutely. Summer, what would be your opinion about this question?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. Obviously, this is a very important conversation to have. Obviously, like with my other colleagues on the panel, every single practice is a good practice. For us specifically, I think there are three that are, I'm going to take a step back. I think all of them are interconnected somehow, right? So good practice number one is somehow connected to two, and two is the three. But for us, I think good practice number one on, coordination with institutional humanitarian actors is really, really important, as well as good practice number 7 on advocacy and awareness raising. And then good practice 5, capacity building, which is also connected to the success of coordinating with institutional humanitarian actors. I think from our experience, we feel that, one of the challenges for Diaspora is they do amazing work on the ground, but what can take them to the next level? And that would be the institutional aspect of things. That means that their organization has to go through very severe, assessment on basically what's going on internally in the organization, policies, procedures, any of those institutional instruments that create a successful organization. But there is one challenge for that, and that's the legality of things. Some organizations, they're not necessarily registered in the country as an INGO versus an NGO. So that limits them in terms of who they communicate with. And then the institutional aspect of creating, success in that arena is that you really need somebody specialized in that area so that they can get you the access to the knowledge of the clusters, the UN clusters in those countries, for example. So that's, that's one thing that's relatively important. Capacity building, without capacity building as an organization, you're limited. And that's really the truth. You're limited in how much you can do, both on, on the ground, and also even communication wise with these agencies and these international actors, and stakeholders for that matter. So yes, that's relatively important for reach. But at the end of the day, that also gets limited to funding, and that could be another challenge as well. And then lastly, the advocacy, as all our colleagues here on the panel said, they have amazing experiences in terms of how they see themselves as ambassadors of, their countries, and, their local expertise is really, really important. I think one of the successes, well, not the success, it is a success, but I think an example is that there's a lot of misinformation out there on the countries that you serve, and that includes Yemen. And so that puts us in a very unique position to actually talk about the correct way of doing things. So for example, traditional, implementation or traditional projects like food baskets is not sufficient to create sustainable, approaches. So you would have to, as an ambassador of that country, talk about how can we change this narrative, and how could our partners continue to change that grant from the typical, let's say, project to a more sustainable approach. And that's where we see ourselves advocating in regards to humanitarian response.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Summer, for this overview. So indeed, just to summarize this question very quickly, in terms of comparative advantages, I mean, things where diaspora organizations excel. Yeah, I think Cynthia, you referred to commitment. Yes, here you refer to understanding. I think Summer, you referred actually to credibility, right? Your credible voices of what's going on. Yeah, there are many more out there for sure, but I think it's the three key messages that I picked up from your answers from this question. Now, I know three organizations of you all went through a very interesting process, right, to grow. You stand here now because you've learned the last couple of years as well. Yeah? If you look back now to this growing process, what are the main lessons learned, from your experience working as part of the Diaspora organization? Should we maybe start with Yasir this time? If you look back, key lessons.
So I think the key lesson is really to understand your advantages and to understand the unique role that you can play, and not to compete with or to try to assume the role of a much bigger organization. You are not the WHO, you are not the UN, you are not USAID. Ultimately, our resources are limited. And our advantages, as my colleague said, is commitment, and that we originally come from these countries. And I think the other important lesson is also to take advantage of a certain challenge, to make it into an opportunity, and to shed the light into specific difficulty. Again, going back to the COVID situation, there was this huge interest in bigger donors around the world during the COVID era to help with oxygen supplies and things like that. And what our organization did, we said, let's just try to transform this into something sustainable. So rather than kind of just sending oxygen cylinders all over, let's just try to pick somewhere and build an oxygen station. So through this approach, our organization was able to provide funding for the first oxygen station in Darfur region, west of Sudan. So do you believe that for the past 50, 60 years, oxygen cylinders were driven by car all the way from Khartoum, almost 1,500 kilometers all the way to Darfur? And we went to big donors and we said, this is just crazy. We know the country. This part was devastated by war. Let's take advantage that there is a lot of funding channeled into the COVID response and build an oxygen station. And now the COVID has, relatively subsided, but we still have the oxygen station there. We believe that it has saved thousands of lives. There is a lot of evidence show that having an immediate sustainable access to oxygen help with reducing the death from pneumonia, especially in children, especially in malnourished children. So Darfur is a prime example where this would happen. So again, understanding this, and that would kind of tie in with what I said earlier, because we know the geography of our country, we know the challenges. Here, the lesson was, you saw a difficult situation, you grasped the opportunity to transform it into something sustainable.
Very nice. I think it's a very nice example indeed of seeing opportunities. And yeah, COVID, I mean, it's indeed, as you say, I mean, despite everything, it has, created, this space for opportunity, right? And if you say that indeed this oxygen station is now still in place and still works and still operates, there's something to be definitely to be proud of. Absolutely. Yeah. Summer, if you look back to your learning process, to your growth process and developing process over the last couple of years, I mean, I know we discussed it at length a couple of months ago. What are your main lessons learned here?
Really, I think it's capacity building. It was one of our struggles in the beginning, as with any other smaller organization. We come from different backgrounds, from different professional backgrounds. And I thought, how can we as an organization or as an entity create a more professional, sound, structure within the organization? My background is public management, public policy and administration. So this is, where my expertise comes along, but it doesn't take one person. It took a tribe of different experts. And I think for us, that was it took about 5 years to actually create a very sound system, both from a financial transparency aspect, all the way through, policies that are accepted to, like, for example, IOM and FAO and other organizations. And I have to tell you, it's not something that we create by ourselves. We did not, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There are other organizations that have been through this. Communicate with them and talk to them. So that's basically one of our main lessons learned over the years. And I think we've reached a very good place at this time.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Summer. And it brings me back indeed also to Cynthia's experience, because also, Cynthia, we also discussed, how your personal experience from your professional background, in the corporate sector, how it helped you as well to evolve and grow as such, So in terms of lessons learned, how do you look back?
You're right, Gudrun. I think that's the probably one of the most important, let's say, practical or tactical lessons that I learned. It's both the chairman and I, when we founded the charity, we all had a very strong business background. And we just, we said, okay, we don't know how to run a charity, but we know how to run corporations. So we transferred the learning from that word to this word. But of course, many things needed to be adapted, because when you are in a corporate background, you have employees, and here you have volunteers. So, but it didn't mean, I think it was very important since the very beginning for us to make sure that we had, the plan, a system, a management system in place, with a plan, with a strategy, with a vision, a long-term vision, a middle-term. And that helped us to be, let's say, to have good foundations for the management of the charity. It wasn't clear for everybody in the team at the beginning why we were trying to do all these very boring things about guidelines for each and every activity that we have, why we want to look at the risks, why we need mitigations. It wasn't clear, but I think we're getting there. But more important than that, I think what we learned was how to deal with ourselves, working with government officials on the ground. That journey to me was more difficult than the journey of transferring knowledge from a corporate background to a nonprofit background, because it meant that I had to really suspend all of us, we had to suspend our judgment and talk to these people in a non-judgmental way with a very clear agenda, which was only about helping Venezuelans, and where we could find common grounds. So that journey of decluttering, not to use another word, ourselves and our social media, we also had to do, we also decided to clean our personal social media, not even the charity. The charity has always been apolitical, but my personal social media was quite political. So we went through the process of clearing all that, and that process also meant clearing inside ourselves. So we could interact with in a very politicized environment with people that didn't trust us at the beginning, but now we have excellent relationships with them. And I hope it can continue, because the strategy paid out, basically not judging and having a very clear and honest agenda.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for this. Indeed, there's also something we discussed at length, and it's a process you have to go through, right? Of keeping your personal opinions a bit on the side, and then focus, on what you want, right, and what you want to achieve as such. I think listening to the three answers, Yassir, you said, I know what you can, know what you cannot do. Some are referred to know what is needed, how to work, what policies and standards you have to have. I think, Cynthia, also you refer to know what you want to do in the end, what is your goal, what you want to achieve, and what limitations are required in order to get to that goal as such. So I think all of you really went through this really impressive learning process. Now this platform, as you also said, as a platform to discuss, to exchange experiences between diaspora organizations is very valuable. I think it's something that is clearly a key message of the Good Practices Guide, but also of this webinar today. Now, if you want to learn from each other, all right, and we have other diaspora organizations that are not that far yet in their development process as the three of you are, what would be your main advice to the ones who are only engaging, in this endeavor as such? Summer, you want to start?
Sure. Communication, honestly speaking. I mean, we're not the only ones struggling, right? There's a whole network, obviously, as we can see with DMAC. They brought them all under one house, and I'm really blown away by that. Actually, I love the environment of that. I think one of the advice is network with other diaspora, talk about those challenges. Maybe there's some things that we can share and discuss. I know, for example, here in the United States with the Yemeni American community, there are organizations that reach out to us saying, we need help in terms of capacity building. It doesn't have to be humanitarian assistance. I think these are very standard things, standard procedures and standard documents that they would need support in. And so we welcome that. We don't, privatize our documents. These are things that we believe that can help the better good of the community. And so I think, communicate, don't be shy, if you're struggling, see how we can help. And if we can, that's great. If we can't, then we can try to find somebody who can. And so I think definitely communication, do not reinvent, create a whole new cycle of things. Just find somebody who's done it and see how they can help and grow from there.
Absolutely. You're not the only one struggling, right? There are other people with similar challenges, for sure. Cynthia, what would you give as an advice to young diaspora organizations?
Yes, I think, but building on what Summer said, I think that the most important thing is to set the foundations right. So you set your foundations right with the right mission and vision, to take a little time to set those foundations and have a plan in place and a strategy and so on. But also be very tolerant, because most of diaspora organizations work with volunteers, and sometimes they can drive you crazy, because a lot of goodwill can actually create a lot of chaos. So I think that that's something that I would advise also to younger and to younger organizations, and learn from others. I mean, the DMAC Good Practices is a good starting point, but also reach out, because we help each other, and we want to see other diaspora organizations succeed as well.
Definitely, that's clear, for sure. Yassir?
So on the same line that Cynthia and Summer took, I would say that initially when you're building your organization, don't respond to the urge and to the pressure that you want to deliver immediately at the expense of setting up the right policies. Like from our own experience, when we started, we're a member-based organization. There is a lot of pressure on us to deliver. Let's do something. So you put all your focus. Let's just collect money and send it to Sudan to do this and do that, without spending the same time to set up the right policies. And this is something that we're working on. We've made major improvement now, but I think setting it, as Cynthia has said from the beginning, is much easier, and it's a learning process. And it's great to hear both of them. And I have a sense that I may be emailing you after this talk, asking for some advice, especially when it comes to setting up policies and making sure that So invest in that. I think it's boring. I mean, writing a policy is never rewarding. It's not like writing a grant or taking money. Spending money is always more rewarding, but setting up policies is boring, but it has to be done. And it's really one of the most important strategic investment that you can do for an organization.
Yeah. So be patient, right? Be patient and invest and learn and be open to learning. That is what I hear from the three of you. And it's great. I mean, yes, if you say you will be emailing each other, I mean, because that's one of the purposes of DMAC, right? To put all of you in touch and to enable this environment of learning. Let me also ask you that question indeed. I mean, what can DMAC as an initiative, as a platform do for you, do for diaspora organizations, to allow you to grow, to support your development process? What added value can DMAC bring to make sure that, you can even work better, more efficient, more effective, and have more impact, How do you see that? Yassir, should we start with you?
That's great. I think exactly what we're doing now. I think, as Summer probably said earlier, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? There are other experiences that we need to learn from. And I can't tell you the amount of challenges that we were able to overcome by just picking up the phone and calling our, Syrian colleagues or our Ethiopian colleagues or our Egyptian colleagues when it comes to these physician groups. So kind of being this backbone of really networking is really what we need. And I think DMAC can play a critical role in that. We're already doing part of this by advocating these good practices.
That's clear. Thank you so much for that. Summer?
Yeah, so, the first event I ever attended for DMAC was just a few months ago in, I think it was Geneva. So I was really blown away just by seeing so many people in one room that actually sounded just like me in terms of complaints and struggles. And I thought it was really amazing. It felt refreshing, not in the best of ways, but I felt like it was comfortable and that, we were not alone. So I think, DMAC plays a really important role in terms of bringing these different actors and these groups into one arena. But I think for me, I would definitely see more added value is maybe also just, and I don't know if DMAC even does this or not, and forgive me if they do and I wasn't aware. For example, surveys every once in a while, seeing what the trends are in terms of like any struggles and issues on the ground. Because interestingly, during that event, I found that they were very similar. The struggles were very similar. I think like in Geneva, it was more about financial issues in terms of funding and the appropriate channels to get the funding into the countries of origin. So definitely, asking, what's going on now every year or every, twice a year or something like that. I think that would be a huge plus.
Thank you very much, Summer, for this idea. Maybe the DMAC colleagues can also react afterwards on that. Who knows? Cynthia, what would you expect from DMAC in the future?
Well, I think I echo Summer's and Yassir's words, but actually, I think I would like to emphasize diaspora groups really need to be part of the Great Bargain. I mean, the Great Bargain is something that has not been implemented it was supposed to be implemented. Funds are really still kept at a very, in the very high and verified level. And for us at diaspora groups, I mean, we really need to understand how the international aid architecture works. And in that sense, to be able to have access those funds. So in that sense, DMAC can definitely be the link with that international aid architecture to help us have credibility, visibility, and understand how to navigate this very apparently tortuous route towards access to international funding. So to facilitate this, access to funding, Great Bargain, I think that's something that that DIMA would definitely help us. And of course, these experiences, which are always very enriching to listen from people like Summer and Yasir and other colleagues, it's always very enlightening, it's refreshing.
Definitely, I think only after half an hour chat and you see how rich your experience is, and how much you can learn from each other. As such, apologies. And just to sorry, got something in my throat. Just to quickly summarize, indeed, I mean, it's half an hour, it flies by, without you knowing it. I think we can continue discussion quite a long time still, but we already have a few questions there, and I would really want to open the floor for questions. But just to, in a summary, what I know from you already, and what I've heard again today, I think we cannot emphasize enough the importance of learning from each other, right? Of exchanging this experience across countries, across nationalities, across professions. Indeed, a lot of diaspora organizations experience the same challenges or similar challenges, right? But you're not alone. I mean, people went through it, and indeed, as Summer said, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So why not learn from each other? If that is indeed what you want, also what Yasir and Cynthia have been saying, if this is really the objective that you like to have. So this learning for sure. I think another thing that I definitely heard that we can conclude as well, yes, there are many challenges and you know them better as I do, but there are also many successes. Yasir referred to something extremely practical, very concrete as well, how Diaspora can help and make a difference as such. So maybe rather, as some has been saying, rather than the complaints, it's also about the successes, and about building on those successes to learn and to grow and to continue to support humanitarian efforts as such. But indeed, as Cynthia said, there is still a lot to be learned. There's still knowledge to be gained as such, but definitely in terms of comparative advantages, the experiences of all of you indicate that you can bridge, Diaspora can really bridge between the origin countries and the host countries, and that there is a place within the system, if you want to call it, for diaspora organizations. Of course, it's not always easy. You need professionalisms, you need standards, you need funding, you need goodwill, but you need organized goodwill, right? So there's many things to be done for sure to make it work, but it can work. I think that is a key message that we can take from here. Now we have a number of questions already in our Q&A box, and let me maybe start with the first question. And of course, I'm just going to read out the question, and then it's up to the three of you who feels, he or she should answer to that question. But the first question, indeed, if there are any advantages for diaspora organizations that may not have the ambition to grow and institutionalize themselves, that want to stay small and volunteer-based, So how do you see the role and strength of this type of organizations? Based on your experience, what do you think? Yes, here, I think you unmuted yourself, so that should be an indication if you'd like to.
Yeah. So again, I think staying small has its advantage. As Cynthia said earlier, that means you'll be able to act very quickly. But usually you'll have to be specific of what you want to do. In the past few months, we have been working in this small organization from a village in Sudan called Senja, and their focus is just to help their village. That's just the organization is built. Most of them are based in Dubai, and some of them are in America. But that's their focus. I think they're doing an important work, very impactful for their village in terms of healthcare, in terms of food security, in terms of vaccinations. So I think ultimately it's about, even if you save one life, if you help one person, I think it's still worth it.
But yes, here indeed there is a place for organizations like that, you say, but it should be a clear decision, may I say that, from those organizations that want to stay small and volunteer based?
Yes, exactly. And being small and volunteer-based does not mean that they're not doing important work. I think you could be small and do extremely important work. So I do think they have value. They know, again, they know the place. They know they're passionate, they're committed. This is where they come from. So I really like this model. I think it can be very helpful. It might not fit everyone, but I think it does have a place in charity work and in making a positive contribution.
Okay. It can be complementary.
Exactly.
Okay. Summer, Cynthia, would you like to respond to that question as well, Summer?
Yeah, so as an example for Yemen Aid, we were established in 2016, and we were volunteer based for about, I think, 3 years. But just be aware that, yes, that there are positives to these smaller organizations. Specifically, I think you can place yourselves as ambassadors of the countries that you represent, kind of correcting that misinformation. I think that's a really important role that volunteer organizations can play. That's a big strength, I think, and you're actually doing a lot of justice to those back home if you're able to successfully reach that. But I think there's always going to be volunteer burnout, and this is something that I think all of us experience. And that puts more burden on these organizations that are more volunteer based. So I think, that's one side of it. But at the end of the day, maybe one focus would be how to direct these larger organizations to local organizations on the ground that can actually be of better help in the quality of project outcomes. So I think that's where volunteer organizations can definitely place themselves.
Thank you very much, Summer, on this. Cynthia, if you allow me, I think the next question is also something that we discussed a bit. You also touched upon it before, and that is indeed the importance or the consideration of neutrality. And so one of the core humanitarian principles, of course. How do you see this? You discussed before, you should get rid of your judgment or your opinion sometimes, if you want to grow as a diaspora organization. But how do you see this?
I think it's absolutely vital. And it's absolutely, because in Venezuela specifically, where the government for many years even denied the fact that there was a crisis, and today, even the word crisis, they don't like it very much. It basically, if you don't have a neutral attitude, you're not going to be able to work. So, for us, it's more important to be effective than to be right. So we can have our ideas about why the crisis is happening. We can have our own personal feelings about the cruelty, about the mismanagement, about all of the above. But because our focus and our interest is just to help people, we really need to keep neutrality. And this is, as I said before, this is an exercise that we need to start within ourselves. So starting with ourselves as individuals, and then to reflect it as an organization. But I don't think it's possible to work in any other way. I mean, some larger organizations can afford to be vocal about political issues or criticize governments. We definitely cannot afford to be like that.
Yeah.
Not in Venezuela.
Yeah. So indeed, this is a difficulty for many diaspora organizations, of course, to work on humanitarian assistance, but then also how to work on advocacy. And sometimes we even go to lobby, right? So Cynthia's opinion is indeed we need to differentiate amongst it. There are other organizations that try to combine it. It is something that is difficult for the diaspora organization, just to emphasize as well, there are many humanitarian organizations that struggle with that difficulty as well, right? How to combine advocacy with the implementation of humanitarian projects, right? Not a clear solution so far, except indeed it does facilitate the work, if you stay focused on job, if I may say it that way. But maybe, Yassir, if I can ask also your opinion, because also Sudan is in a context where, there's a lot of political work and political advocacy going on. How do you go about this?
Well, it's a difficult one, and I think sometimes it's very and extremely difficult to stay neutral. I think ultimately, if you want to have a sustainable solution to the problems that you're dealing with, part of the solution is going to be political. And we are being physicians, sometimes when there are kind of large-scale human rights abuses, you just can't shut down about that, even at the expense of obstructing some of your operations in Sudan. So we have been very vocal about human rights abuses. We're trying to frame it in a way that sustains physicians' neutrality. But, in recent months, the government did attack, for instance, hospitals where demonstrators were being treated. So for these situations, you find yourself in a very difficult situation that you can't, you can't shy from that. Again, it requires you being careful and making sure that you're not getting, too political. But ultimately, I think there are lines that when crossed, you will have to do something and you'll have to say something. And, we do advocate for these cases here within the US. We do speak to the US officials about it. And we do believe that, advocating for human rights is a core part of our mission.
So indeed, different experiences, how to go about it. Definitely not one solution, for sure. It depends very much on the context and the organization as such, if it works or not. Difficult question, though. Another difficult question, and we have still 2 minutes left, but I think, Summer, I'm going to address it to you because we talk about transparency, and we also discussed that before, indeed, that Yemen has to abide by the rules in the US, but also by what's going on in Yemen, of course. So we mentioned that this having to work with not double standards, but double systems as such. So what's your opinion on transparency? How to achieve it?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest issues that I think, and I think a lot of people are complaining about. I'm going to take Yemen as an example, is that civil society is very, very vocal about issues in Yemen. And one of the biggest issues is that they feel that INGOs are spending either too much on admin or there's no really transparency in terms of what these numbers look like in terms of projects. And so they've actually done hashtags and just these campaigns around these topics, which I appreciate, honestly, in which we deal with two systems. We deal with the US system, and then we deal also with the Ministry of International Planning in Yemen. We have all our financial documents on our website. And I think it's just one way of solving this issue. There are challenges. You as an organization have to be honest with yourselves in terms of where your financials are. And that's okay. That's just the reality of things. And you have to be public about it. I wouldn't say, share it everywhere, but have it on your website. I think this is really important. And I think the second part is that Diaspora. So you have to have a policy in place or try to strive for a goal in your organization, a ratio between admin and project aid. And sometimes it's not, doable to reach the golden 90-10 ratio. But I think, having an understanding of how much money is spent, that's more capacity building, that's more financial. And that needs to be discussed between you and your board and your team. And you will receive criticisms. That's the truth. You will receive criticism as a public figure, as a public worker or a public servant. This is common. This is just a natural way of human nature, and that's okay. That's part of it. We have to grow thick skin, and we have to address them kindly, of course. So, I think take it in and try to kind of answer them appropriately and try to do better. You hear from those so you can learn. And I think that's really, really important.
Thank you very much, Summer, for this sharing of experience as such. I know there's still some other questions or sub-questions, but in terms of timing, I think I need to hand back to Alexandra. Thank you very much, Cynthia, Summer, and Yassir from my side. It was a pleasure to have this discussion with you.
Thanks, Gudrun, and indeed also Summer, Yassir, Cynthia. It's been really interesting listening to your learnings, and thank you very much for taking the time to share with us and agree again to share your stories and to contribute to this conversation. It's been really interesting listening to it, and I think we all can learn quite a lot from your stories. I'd also like to thank everyone who has been listening in the room. Thanks for joining us today. And also, obviously, thank you very much to USAID for making it possible, the research, the good stories, the good practices, and the team behind the scenes facilitating the discussion. As some of the panelists also said, for everyone who's out there interested in learning more and really DEMAC is happy to support you. So we have a whole resource library where you can find the good practice guide, but also some videos supporting it, some other formats to have it really interactive. My colleagues are going to put the links in the chat as well for everyone. Do reach out for peer learning, for more information. Do reach out to us. We're very happy to support you, obviously. And having said that, I wish everyone a lovely day, afternoon, evening, depending where you are. And thanks a lot again for joining us today. Goodbye.